Good morning, everyone. This is the JSLink session. We're going to be talking about how to customize SharePoint forms. I'm going to go ahead and close these guys off. I'm going to be trying to run this from Windows 10's Spartan Browser. So everything you're going to see today will work in the future browser, which is a sparse browser. Right? It doesn't have a lot of options, and yet everything we're going to do looks to the future for how we can customize SharePoint forms and SharePoint views. Right? I'm going to spend most of my time focused on SharePoint views today. I don't know if you got to see the session that Martin Hatch did yesterday, but I've got his URL here. He sent it to me last night. I'm going to go ahead and pull this up on the screen so you can see it. The jump Evo JSLink is where you can go and get all the JavaScript files I'm going to share with you today. It also has a PDF of the slide deck and so forth. It's just a OneDrive location. You can go download that zip file. The other, the mhat.ch, Martin Hatch, right? That's his jump to all of the code that he did yesterday. And we talked early on, since there's 3 JSLink sessions this week, we've got Martin's, which was heavy on customizing the form itself. I'll get to that. I'll talk about that. But mine will be quite high level. Let me say just rudimentary so that you get the core basics of how to do it. If you want in-depth examples of how to, put maps onto your forms and how to change up the underlying fields to be quite cool, right? Then go get Martin's code, and you can plug in the same concepts I'm going to be teaching you at a much more sort of complex level. All right, so we're going to be starting from the beginning and going from 0 to 60 quite quickly. I'm going to try to get through the slides very quickly because we've got some really great code demos to show you. I'm going to talk a little bit about the SharePoint-isms of doing JSLink. Now, if you don't know what JSLink is, I'm going to cover that momentarily, but it basically lets us customize the presentation and the forms within a SharePoint user interface. So if we've got lists or libraries, if we've got web parts, anytime we've got a SharePoint list involved, any component that has the JSLink property. So I'm going to talk about some of the SharePoint-isms associated with that. I'm going to talk about some of the JavaScript-isms in SharePoint 2013. If you want to do customizations, you really need to learn JavaScript. It is the way that you can make it happen both on-prem and online, right? The solutions that I'm going to be showing you will work in Office 365 as well as on your home turf. And should work into the future, and I'll explain more about that momentarily, all right? I will talk a little bit about MDS because it throws a wrench into things. The MDS feature is turned on by default in team sites. That's the minimal download strategy. And so we have to mitigate what it does because it basically says, I've already loaded your JavaScript. I'm not going to do it again. So first time through, it looks great. Second time through, it's back to what it looked like before. So we have to figure out how to mitigate that. I'll show you that. Talk a little bit about the form futures. Why is this the form strategy you should be looking at? Right? And a little bit about what's possible there. And then we'll do quite a few demos. Sound good? Okay. So what is JSLink anyway? Well, it's the property that Microsoft introduced in SharePoint 2013 that's on a whole bunch of out-of-the-box components. Web parts, list views, list form web parts, etc. They have this JSLink property. Not only that, but we can go down deeper. We can say, hey, this site column has a JSLink. We can say that the column definition has a JSLink property. We can say that the list definition has a JSLink property. So it can be propagated throughout an entire, wherever you want it to. Throughout your farm if you're on premise, right? If you're on premises, you can actually make it so that this is a change that's available throughout your entire farm. Can't do that in SharePoint Online because we don't have access to the underscore layouts folder where we can dump stuff off and use it from everywhere, right? So it's a site collection or lower kinds of solution in SharePoint Online, farm level solution if you need it to be in on premises. That said, it is possible for us to make this so that we can do it in a one-off kind of a scenario where I'm just going to go into this list for this view and make some alterations. And then if I like them, I can go to another list and another view and make the same alterations. Or put a web part on the home page and say, use the JSLink here. right? So it's very versatile, either to a specific list or to a wide set of lists or to an entire farm if you're on premises. Okay, make sense? Some SharePoint-isms. You're going to need to know these tokens. Tilde site means the site that I'm on. Tilde site collection means go to the top level site and get your resources from there. That's my favorite. I like that one because I can put my resources in one place and then use them throughout the entire site collection. You know, whatever I'm trying to point JSLink to, I always just say tilde site collection, and that will give me the URL starting with the protocol and the site collection that I'm in, / whatever resource I want from any site within that collection. The other ones are for scaling up to something higher. So your site layouts, your site collection layouts, which should always be roughly the same, and your layouts folder. I want just that centralized location where I can dump resources on the file system of my web front end. So those are the tokens that you'll need to know about. There are other tokens in SharePoint, but these are the ones that are most pivotal to JSLink. We've already talked a little bit about the scope. You can either do it at the site scope or the site collection scope. Again, I think a site collection scope is a good way to go because that's where the site collection administrator can put the resources and grant access to the people so that we can use it throughout the entire site collection, in all the sites in the site collection. We do need to put these JavaScript files and other resources into a specific location. And that's a little controversial, right? Because they are indeed display templates. They're just sort of not search display templates. So while they're a way to display using a template, and JavaScript is the tool, we don't write an HTML file and have it auto-generated to JavaScript where we just manage the display template. Instead, we're physically going to write the JavaScript. And therefore, it really doesn't have to be registered as a display template in the master page gallery. And that's a good thing because the master page gallery kind of got hidden away recently in SharePoint, Office 365's SharePoint Online. They literally took all the galleries and said, you don't really need to know about these unless some high level up said for your entire tenancy that you can see these galleries. And if you turn it off or turn it on, it takes up to 24 hours to make the switch to where you see the galleries or you don't. It's a security feature for us all. And so getting to the master page gallery may not be as straightforward as it sounds. That said, you can always type in the URL and get there, right? But it's hidden away from the site settings page in the future. And if you read through that article pretty closely, you'll see that's the direction Microsoft is heading. We're not going to be customizing master pages, right? We're not going to be putting list templates or site templates up there. Instead, we're going to be doing something else. This is the something else that you're going to want to look to, right? JSLink. I like to go ahead and create an asset library. You can use site assets if you'd like, or in this particular case, I'm going to put it in the top level site of a site collection. I'm going to call it JS. The JS folder. I like that because it's nice and short. In demos like this, you can see the whole URL. Tilde site collection / JS. That's where everything is. Doesn't necessarily mean I'm recommending you put it there. It just means that it makes the URL easy for you to see while we're trying to work through the various resources. That said, I think it's very convenient, although contrary to many of the blog posts out there, not required, right, to map a file share. If you've done this recently in Office Online, right, in SharePoint Online through Office 365, you find out that it doesn't necessarily always work. It'll be grayed out. You can't click on the icon to open up your document library. It depends upon your browser settings and numerous other, let's just say, factors. And so I've discovered that if I just go to File Explorer and paste in the URL to my document library, it will automatically set up the WebDAV for me. So I don't have to go try to figure out how to map that as a drive. Not that you can't do that, but there are some circumstances where you can't. Windows 10, Spartan Browser is one of those circumstances where you can't. Everything's grayed out, you can't make it happen. So I had to come up with a new way of doing it and just pasting that URL directly into File Explorer. I'll show you what that looks like. And boom, I've got access to the direct files in that document library. Why is that good? Because then I can edit them with whatever my favorite JavaScript editor is. Today I'm going to be using Notepad++. It's free out there. You can just use Notepad, right? You don't even have to install anything. But Notepad++ is nice because it color codes things and it shows the indentation and it makes it easy for me to work with the language that is JavaScript. So creating a file share is not required, but it is a nice thing. Hey, all my JavaScript files are on the J drive, right? And then you can go to the J drive, and that's where you find all your stuff. You're directly editing those files. Some JavaScript fundamentals that you're going to want to know. First thing is that what we're about to do is a field by field specific thing, or we can override the entire view, so fields and views. That said, you might want to make it so that that's reusable, right? So that I've got a way to say, hey, I would like to use that one here, the one I worked on all night last night, right? I want to put that one into this context. So if you put them up onto that site collection gallery somewhere, site assets in the top level site maybe, right? And you refer to it via the site collection, and you write the JavaScript so that it's generic enough to be used in multiple places, then you can maybe benefit from write it once, use it in a lot of places. Make sense? Okay. You also want to avoid polluting what's called the global namespace. Now, if you don't know JavaScript, it's effectively like this. You're writing some JavaScript, I'm writing some JavaScript, they're writing some JavaScript, and we're all trying to throw it onto a page. So if we all put a variable up at the top called done, who's done wins? Well, last one in wins in JavaScript, right? So if you happen to be the last one to define what that done value is, then everybody else gets your done value. That's probably not good, right? So we can encapsulate all of our code into what's called a namespace. And I'm going to show you how you can make that envelope, how you can make it so that your code doesn't conflict with other people's code, because they might be putting some JSLink on the page as well. We also want to use something called useStrict. It's just a comment, looks just like that. And the reason why we want to use that is it basically will yell at us and say, you can't do that if we're doing boneheaded stuff. So all of the JavaScript's been around a long time, right? So all of the legacy kinds of bad things that we can do are still available to us. And so it's good to use strict where it'll say, you know, that eval statement we probably shouldn't be using here. And so it'll kind of keep you on track with what's not a good practice anymore. And then there's a website out there called Jslint. If I've got time, I'll quickly throw some JavaScript in there so you can see what it does. But effectively, it's a styling tool for JavaScript so that our JavaScript can look very consistent. It's a little bit picky, and so sometimes you want to say, yeah, ignore this, ignore that, because I know what I'm doing here. Right? But it's a great place to start to make sure that our JavaScript looks good, easy to support. I'm going to give you some good methods for making that happen as well. So now, how do we make all of this happen? Right? It's called JSLink, but it uses templates that we're going to create in JavaScript to override the out-of-the-box capabilities. Let me see if I can describe it to you this way. When SharePoint renders a view or a form, it literally sends the data that it pulled out of the database down to the browser, and on the browser it has some default rendering. And it says, use the default template to show me what a title column looks like, to what a drop-down list looks like, to what a checkbox looks like. So that default rendering template is already built into the JavaScript handed to us by SharePoint. We can go in with a client template through the template manager and say, don't use the out-of-the-box template to render that thing that came down. Use my JavaScript to render it instead. Does that make sense to everybody? So I can change the way that something is presented on a view, or the way that I collect data from somebody on a form, on a field-by-field basis. You can also override the entire view if you'd like and say, give me all the fields and let me present it using some HTML of my own. So this is our ability to sort of get on the client side and change how it gets shown to the user. That's huge, because that means that no matter what SharePoint does in the future, if they're calling my JavaScript is going to continue to format it the same. So this gives us a great future focus, right? I mean, if we build our templates so that SharePoint just gives us what needs to be presented, we should be pretty future-proof. It's a nice model. I'm super thrilled that they came out with it in 2013. You do have to have one JavaScript object, the template manager, and then it has to have a template object. So we're going to create an empty object. I call mine the template object. I call it TO. Again, just a very short variable name so that you can see all the code. But my template object will always have a template child, And then inside of the template child, I optionally can have fields, because I can override on a field-by-field basis or the overall template itself. Is this making sense? Everybody, I see heads nodding. That's good. We can also reference fields that, sorry, let me say it this way. The fields that we specify in the collection of fields must be in the select list for that view. So in other words, I can't say, hey, I would like for you to render out first name and then not return first name from the server. If I do that, bad stuff happens. So you have to make sure that the user is selecting for the view that this rendering template's going to be on, that they chose first name before you stick the first name rendering out there, right? It is possible for you to say, hey, they chose first name, but it's not in the view, so don't output anything, right? And in fact, I'm not sure that it even throws an exception. It's just a silent drop. But referenced fields that you're depending upon to show up, and then they're not there, will show holes in your logic, right? And so the fields that you reference that aren't there are going to behave badly. The last thing I'll mention in the JavaScript template overrides is something called console.log. I'll show you a quick little demo of this, but it's great. All modern browsers, if you push F12, will pop up a dev toolbar, and there's a console tab. And if you click on that, anything that you write out to console, you just say console.log, blah, whatever you want to say in there, and it can even be a dynamic value, a variable. It'll just write it right out to the log, and it's a great way to help troubleshoot what's going on here, right? So you don't have to get into the debugger. They also have debuggers. All of them have debuggers, right? But you don't have to get into that level of detail. Instead, you can literally just log out the things that you want to see. It's a very nice way to see what might be going wrong. Templates, remember we have to have a template. So we have to have the template override, and we are optionally have some fields. But we can also override some other things. The header, the item itself, like give me all the fields and I will render out the item. A footer, we can specify it for a specific base view ID or the list template type. So consider this, I've got a home page and I brought a contacts list on and I brought a announcements list on and I brought, let's say, a calendar on. And I want to render the announcements list. Well, then I might want to target my template manager to say the list template type that I want to render to is a 107, or that's tasks. Announcements, whatever announcements is, I can't think of it, 104, right? So I can target the list template type for the page that I'm on. So my rendering template can say, I'm only trying to render to this specific view on a page with multiple views. A couple of helpers for us is something called context. All SharePoint pages that we're going to be dealing with will have the CTX variable. The CTX variable has really nice things like, what is the root of the site that I'm on? What is the title of the list that I'm on? Give me the current item and all of its information. Give me the current field value, the current field schema. Give me the current item's field name. Those are really nice things to pull out of the context to say, I don't want to go searching for those things, just hand those to me. So the CTX variable is very important. There's another variable that you'll see referenced quite often called SPPageContextInfo. And inside of this is a JavaScript variable that has lots of other resources for us about my current location, what locale I'm in, those kinds of things. So if you need to do a multilingual kind of a solution, you can do that using the SPPageContextInfo. Right? It's just a variable that's available on all SharePoint pages in the underlying JavaScript that we can just reference sort of as a static global. Make sense? MDS. Problematic MDS. Anybody else hate MDS? Yeah, look at all the hands. That's great. So MDS is on by default in team sites and a few others. In fact, it's not off in very many places. It is off in a few places. And if you do anything that breaches MDS, they'll automatically go, forget it, and go back to just regular rendering. So what is MDS? Let's just say it's an aggressive caching strategy that makes only the parts of the page re-render that have to re-render. So it's supposed to be just a smart way to render a page so that it doesn't consume more bandwidth than it needs to, right? And it renders quickly and so forth. And that's great if you need it. 99% of the time, you can't tell the difference between when it's on and when it's not. If you put a web part on there that's really heavy, right, that takes a long time to crunch through and render, well, then you'll notice when MDS is turned on. Unfortunately, it's turned on, and 99% of the time we don't care right? It isn't helping us a lot. However, it is getting in the way if you're trying to use JavaScript to make changes, right? Because it's going to cache your JavaScript and then not run it again because it already ran that. Well, it looked great on the first page load, and then it stops. It goes back to the out-of-the-box rendering on the refresh of the page. Somebody clicks on the link again, or somebody just changes something and clicks the OK button or something. It comes back and renders back in, and whoa, where did all of my custom rendering go? So how do I fix this? I've got an example in the JavaScript file, but these are the 4 bullet points that I gleaned out of Victor Villen's wonderful blog post on this. In fact, I talked to him day before yesterday, and I said, this was so great. I'm glad you put this together because what a complicated thing to try to figure out. And he was like, yeah, it took a while, but those are the 4 things that you need to ensure that you're doing. I've got some sample code in the 3rd JavaScript file that we're going to look at, so you can see how to fix MDS. All right? So how does JSLink actually help us with forms? Right? So we've talked about, hey, this is great, some custom rendering of things, right? But we all know that InfoPath has a limited lifetime. And they've said that by 2023 it will be replaced by something. But they're going to include it in 2016 because, well, they don't have that new something yet. They promised something called Fossil, but it's been canceled because something better is coming. But we don't know what that is yet. So Fossil's not here. InfoPath is going to go away someday. What am I supposed to do? Well, Microsoft says go ahead and use access forms, right? Just crack open the access services from your enterprise service account, right? And start writing access forms. But from there, I can't do workflows, and that's complicated. I got to learn a new technology, right? And there's some other potential issues with that they're hoping to solve. They said, well, if you get a simple form, just make an Excel survey. Well, okay, but I'm not trying to I really just want to make a little KPI on there, make the form look pretty. I want to put my logo on there. I want to change it up so that it looks like my form, not SharePoint's form, right? And that's what JSLink does really, really well. There are some third parties that they recommend, and these guys all have forms tools, but I'm trying to look at something you don't have to go buy and install, right? I'm looking for something that I can just tweak, that little bit of something that makes it better, right? That makes it more applicable to my business rules. So it's an ability for me to write just a little bit of JavaScript from which I could access any part of my SharePoint implementation or even reach outside of there and work with other datas, right? So if you were at my REST session on Monday, talked about how you can go out and get data from someplace else and bring it in. In fact, AC is doing a REST talk this afternoon. So if you're still interested in understanding REST and how I can use that to grab information from somewhere and present it, then that would be a good one to go to. You could write an app for SharePoint, right? I could write a custom master page. I could do any of these things, but JSLink is beautiful because I can say, go use this JavaScript file. Oh, the requirements have changed. Let me go to the centralized place where I put it and make a little alteration, and now it reflects everywhere. Oh, you don't want to use that anymore? Okay, no problem. Just unlink it, right? Say, I'm not calling that JavaScript file anymore. So it's super easy to recover from. You know, there's no problems with some kind of version management of DLLs on the server that somebody didn't try to move when we backed up and restored or whatever, right? This is a file that's sitting in the content database that I can edit myself using Notepad, no special tools, no special licensing, right? And I can do some pretty amazing things. So why JSLink? Well, all the things that I've already said, right? Probably the best thing is that I can get in there and start to do this today, and I know it's going to survive to tomorrow, right? Because SharePoint itself is using this technology to render their list views, their forms. So this is what SharePoint is using to make it happen. They're probably not going to make changes to the way that they get data from the database and then call a JavaScript file to render it into the browser. If they do, we're quite a ways from today, right? I mean, that's out there a ways. And hopefully they'll have a new forms tool by then. Okay, so that's the idea. Questions before I go into the demos? First demo I'm going to do is overriding the list view and the list item. There's going to be some JavaScript in here, and I just kind of got to know how many people already have a good handle on JavaScript. You're already pretty clean about it. You got it about a little more than half, maybe half. Okay, I'm going to talk about JavaScript at first very, very rudimentary, and then we're going to grow into what I call a pattern that I use all the time. It comes from my developer background, so if you're familiar with the idea of static classes and namespaces and public interfaces to private members, all of those things will be very visible and easy to recognize. A repeatable, supportable kind of a pattern for helping us build good JSLink solutions, not just slapping some JavaScript on there. Make sense? How am I doing for time? It's 9:30. What time did I start? 9 o'clock. I got half an hour. Okay, that should work. All right, so I went ahead and I created a team site out there. I threw up a couple of lists. By the way, I include the STP files. If you can find your web template gallery, you can upload the STP files into there, and you can create your own. Your list template gallery, and you can create your own presidents and prime ministers lists. Okay, I gave you the code for that. It's just an STP file. You put it in your list template gallery, go add an app, and make your own list. Right now, you'll have the list that I've got. I've also uploaded a bunch of JavaScript into my top-level site. Notice I'm on a child site called Evo. If I go to my top-level site here, my team site, I always have to lean down to use my mouse. It drives me nuts. Again, I'm in the Spartan Browser on Windows 10, so you can see Office 365 is rendering in this context. Just slowly, very, very slowly. There's my JavaScript document library. Just made a document library, dump some stuff in there. Now, remember, these could go into the display templates of your master page gallery. They just don't have to, right? If you want to put them in there and you want to give them some attributes and stuff and use them as a part of your search, then you can do that. They'll then start showing up in the search panels where you can select display templates, which you may not want. Right? So I usually put these in some kind of a library that I can grant wide permission for people to use, and then we use them throughout the entire site collection. I've got a whole bunch of them here. I'm going to start with everything that starts with party and go down, and then I'm going to talk about the leaders themselves. Okay? I've got a couple of folders here, UK and US, for the actual pictures of the leaders that we've had over the last couple of centuries. Okay, so I'm going to start out. I'm going to go to my prime ministers list and show you that it's just a contacts list with 2 columns on it. I literally made a contacts list and I added a term and a party column. That's all that's out here. So you can see on the right-hand side, there's a term and a party column. Wouldn't it be nice if we could alter the presentation of this list so that our business users could better consume it? That's the idea, right? We're going to alter the way that this list looks for the business requirements that we have. So let's start out by changing the party column a little bit, making it a little bit more friendly. We do that by simply saying we want to edit the page, and on this page, on every list view, item edit, and item new page, there's a rectangle, a web part, that has properties. It's called a mystery meat navigation, worst kind of navigation in the world, but if you hover over it, you'll see that there's a little arrow you can drop down here, and if you have permissions, you can actually make alterations to this. You have to be a designer or above, right, in order to make these changes, right? But if I can edit the web part properties on this page, right, then I can alter the presentation of this view. Make sense? Now, I'm going to be doing this on a one-off basis, but this same thing could be done down in the list definition, or in the column definition, right, or in the site column definition. By a developer using some XML, they can set the JSLink property so that when it gets added in, this is already set. So it could be preset for you is what I'm trying to say. But it basically is the same concept. I'm going to set the property called JSLink to a location. All right, so I'm going to go down to my miscellaneous section down here. Whoops. I didn't say edit the web part. I got to click it. There we go. So this should pull up a dialog on the right-hand side over here. So I'm wondering if maybe this has been open long enough that Spartan slowed down, because that happens sometimes. So I'm going to close out of this, and I'm just going to go back into it. I have tested this entirely, so I do know that it works, but I'm just going to go back into it to make it a little bit faster. Hopefully it just remembers where I left off. I typed it too fast. This is a very new build, right? It's Windows 10. Fast updates to the Spartan Browser. So if this fails, we can always go, come on, it's trying to log me in. It's just taking a second. There we are, we're back. Okay, so I'm going to go back to the prime minister's list, try to edit it again. Quick quiz, what's the first thing I do? Edit page. Then you go to the web part, edit web part. So you find the little arrow, drop it down, say edit the web part, and you should get a panel on the right. There we go. It's going a little bit faster. The panel on the right that we have has a miscellaneous section. Down at the bottom of the miscellaneous section, all the way down to the bottom of this page, effectively, right, we're going to find the XSL link that's been there for a while, but there's a new property called JSLink. Trying to get there. It was going very fast at my hotel, which has horrible internet, so there we go, JSLink. Now here's the key. If you go to the document library where you uploaded all that JavaScript and you go get the URL for that JS file and you paste it in to that location, it will completely and utterly ignore it. It won't work at all. I did it for like 2 days going, what the heck? I know, I saw this and it's possible, but how do you make it work? Beat my head against a brick wall until I figured out, oh, you must use a token to refer to the relative location of that file to where you are. So it must start with or with a tilde site, or a tilde site collection, or a tilde layouts, or what have you. So remember, mine are in the site collection, the top level site. So I'm going to say tilde site collection. And then I'm going to say /JS. That's the folder that I'm in. And the first one I'm going to do is called party animal. So PARTYANIMAL dot 01.js. So that's my party animal 01.js. Click OK on that. And we'll immediately see a scrunched in version of the change that I just told it to do. I basically said, don't render out the parties. Instead, render out a static value called animal in that party column. Static value. Now, consider if this was a password. Maybe you just want to go star, 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 star. Right? So there is some applicable usage for this, although very little, I would have to admit. I'm going to go ahead and click on OK, and you'll see that now whenever I come back to this, it's going to render out animal, except MDS is turned on. If you look up in here, you can see that my start page, well, you can't see it very well, can you? I believe MDS is turned on. So the second time I go to this view, it's going to revert back to the original rendering. I'll show you how to overcome that in just a couple of minutes, but wow, this is really running slow. Anybody help me out with the speed of the internet? So that party column is going to be a static value. Let me show you how that came to be. So if I just grab off the URL that I've been using here, and then I go to my file explorer. In my file explorer, I can literally just paste in my URL plus the document library that I'm in and click at enter. And it will pull up the documents that are in that document library in a web dev location in my file explorer. That's huge, right? I mean, that's something that we've really struggled with, trying to get File Explorer to just work like it would on a regular file system folder. Well, if you do it like this, it does that. You don't have to go into SharePoint and make sure that the icon is clickable or anything like that. You can literally just paste the URL in File Explorer and it should just work like that. So fortunately, I have this file locally. I like to edit them directly off of the internet because then if I make changes to it, you can immediately see those changes reflected in the browser. Now remember, you got browser caching going on. So you may have to hit Control-R to hard refresh your page in order to get your changes. But you should be able to open up any of the files from this File Explorer location and make changes to them, click Save, Control-S, go back, refresh in the browser, and boom, you can see your changes. It's an immediate responsive kind of thing. Let's see, I'm going to go ahead and go to my Evo folder here where I've got my JSLink stuff and show it to you there. I'm going to Party Animal 01 first. Just going to open that up with Notepad++. And this is what that JavaScript function looks like. Can you guys see that in the back? Yeah, you can see the code? All right, so what I have here is called an immediately invoked function. It means that because it starts out with a parenthesis, and down here on the bottom, it's got prin, and then close parenthesis, that it'll immediately execute. So if I refer to this, this code will start running right away as soon as it gets loaded into the browser. Okay, so this is immediately executed or invoked JavaScript function. I went ahead and created a variable called TO. Remember, that's template override. And I gave it a child object called templates. Both of those are empty. Just brace, brace. That's a JavaScript notation for give me an empty object. Inside of there, I created another object called fields because I want to override the party field. So I said the party field's view should just present a static value called animal. That's it. That's the entire JSLink for customizing that column. That's pretty amazing. But we have a couple of issues. The first issue is, and then down the bottom, I use the template manager to register my TO object. So it knows to call my function to render that column, the party column in this case, during a view, rather than calling the default out of the box rendering. The problem is that this function is not encapsulated in a supportable way. So if you start doing this and we start to get some overlap, we might run into each other. So there are some JavaScript fundamentals that can really help us out here. Let me go ahead and pull up number 2. It does the exact same thing. Maybe I won't even render it in the browser because it does the exact same thing. But this is a step forward in making it a little bit more readable, a little bit more supportable. If we go down to the bottom, we'll do that in the third one. So once again, in the center here, you can see that I've got my template override. I not only have overridden the view, but I've also overridden the display form. Now, why would I want to override the display form? For any individual item, I might want to have a unique display, right? So the view is for all items on whatever view I've set the property on, and the display form is for a single item. So I can override them the same, or I can override them different. And I can say, I would like for the view to have this presentation, but I would like to have an item to have a different presentation. So maybe I've got an address, and on the view, I'm just going to give the city and state, and that's it. But on the item, I'm going to give a nice looking thing with a map and whatever, right? You get the idea. We can also do edit form and new form. I'll deal with that at the very end of this talk. I just used the template override the template manager to register that override, and dun dun dun, I get animal 2, which is pretty slick. I've got a console log there on the bottom though, and if I ran this and just clicked on the console tab, hit F12 and click on the console tab, you would see animal template applied will show up in that console. Given that my internet is running so slow, I think I might just wait off on that. Okay, but do you see what I'm saying there? The console log is very easy to use. You literally just throw it in wherever you would like to see what's happening here right now. So the console log is a really effective way to do that. However, this code is still not encapsulated, right? It's a little bit better, but let's see if we can improve it a little bit more. So this is called these are JSLink comments, and Jslint, L-I-N-T, Jslint will let us look at the JavaScript and see how well it's written. It'll tell me what my indentation should look like and what my punctuation should look like, and if I'm using stuff I really should avoid and things like that. So these are hints at the top for Jslint. I can literally just copy this code. I can go out to the Jslint site and paste it into the top. There we go. Paste it into the top and say Jslint. When I do that, it will tell me, hey, I'm using these globals, but I said I was going to use them in the hints. And it's not complaining, but it's telling me that I have an anonymous variable called TO that are using these global objects. So it gives me some information. If I had bad stuff in there, it would show up in red and say, you know, you're doing stuff that you really probably shouldn't be doing, right? So the Jslint will help me syntax check what I'm doing, make sure that I stay within some boundaries of, at least I can look at it and go, no, I'm okay with that, right? And so at the bottom, there's some checks you can do and say, yeah, you know what, I'm okay with continues or whatever it is. And so I can specify, I want to use I++ and I-. So let me go ahead and use those even though you say that they're not any good. All right, something like that. So this is called Jslint. I really like it as a means by which to sort of validate what I'm doing. Let me go ahead and pull up party animal number 3 here. It's the same. It doesn't do anything any different other than say animal 3, right? But it starts to change up things just a little bit. Now, the first thing that Victor Villain says is you must register your namespace, that is the folder in which you're going to put all of your code, using the ASP.NET JavaScript called register namespace. If you don't do that, MDS will not garbage collect your object properly, and you'll get a whole bunch of them and a whole bunch of them until the browser blows up. All right? And so if you just define a namespace using JavaScript technique, which is basically just make an object, just like this TO one down here, right? If I just make an object called Todd, that's not going to be any good, and put everything inside of it. I need to register a namespace so that MDS knows to garbage collect that namespace. Once I've done that, I have a folder, my Todd folder. Most likely, the stuff that's in my Todd folder is not going to impact the stuff that's in your folder, whatever yours is called, as long as it's not called Todd, right? Because it's an encapsulation. So everything I do inside the Todd folder is just for me. Nobody else can get to that stuff. It's all private. I went ahead and created what I call a static class called CSR for client-side rendering. You can call it anything you want. As long as you know what you called it, you can say, inside of my Todd folder, go to that static class and get some stuff. Now, JavaScript is always executed from the bottom up, That's because it is a sequential compiler. So what you're supposed to do, you're supposed to define A, define B, define C. Those are functions or variables or whatever. And then at the very bottom say, now I want to use B to do something to C, calling A as a little private helper. So you've defined them at the top, and then you call up into them. So at the very bottom, we have that familiar immediately executing function, right, that takes care of a little bit of housekeeping. Right here is the only other thing you have to do in order to handle MDS. So the first thing that you have to do is at the very top up here, you have to register your type name. And then down here at the bottom, you have to include this if statement. This if statement basically says, look, if the page context info is available, then MDS is probably in the mix. So let's register this JavaScript file. And this name right here at the bottom must exactly match what you said your JSLink looked like. If it doesn't, then it won't work. Then MDS will still screw up your stuff. But effectively, if that URL exactly matches what you put into the JSLink property, then it'll go, oh, you want me to load that every time? Okay, and it'll load it every time. So you can see what I've done. If those are there, then I go ahead and I register my module using this URL and the register overrides that I've talked about above, right? And then I call it. So I'm saying I'm going to call it, and by the way, MDS, you should call it too every time you reload this page. That's all I'm really doing here. MDS, call my function if I'm not calling it. If you're going to be the one calling it, then you call it for me. That's it. That's what the if statement does. MDS, please call the same function that I'm going to call down here. Then I'm simply saying inside of the CSR static class, please call my public member, my function, if you will, right, called register overrides. Now I'm going to go up, and I find register overrides internally calls the lowercase r register overrides, which if I scroll up is defined right up here. That is a function. You can see that it's equal to a function. So it's a method. If it was just equal to a value, it would be a property. Properties and methods, object-oriented stuff. In fact, you can kind of get into this and start going, wow, this is just like C#. It isn't C#. It isn't Java. But it can feel like it is a really, high-class 4GL language. Supportable, easy to understand. Somebody who has a Java or C# background can come in here and read this file and go, oh, I get it. I get what they're trying to do. Because I have public and private members, static classes. I'm calling into my, into my predefined things that are above me. Oh, my battery is low. I did plug it in. Hey, guys. I'm plugged in, but oh, it came unplugged down here. Oh, that would have been bad. All right. So by calling up into my private member, nobody else can call this one. Let me demonstrate this by just changing this. If I said this one was called Todd, then I would say register overrides is called Todd internally. So the internal Todd function is not something anybody else can call. All they can call is the register overrides with a capital R. So I get to say what part of my private members, my properties and my methods, are being exposed using what names. That means everything inside of CSR is mine. You're not going to touch any of it, right? This is the only thing you have to look at right here. This is the only thing you have to look at to ensure that you're not conflicting with somebody else who might be in the Todd CSR namespace in any other file. That's pretty cool. Yeah, so that's how I've written all of the JavaScript for all of the examples that we've done here. We've got a register namespace at the top. We've got a static class. We go all the way to the bottom. We define what we need to do for MDS. And then we call up into the predefined public members. That's the interface into the private members within that CSR class. It might feel a little overwhelming when you first start working with it, but I'm telling you what, if you start using this, you can even, if you've got Visual Studio, open it up and collapse members, Control-MO to get an outline. You can see all it just looks just so wonderful. It's so much easier to work with because it's organized in a way that you go, oh, I get this. These are all my private members, right? And here's my public interface, and I can call into that from any of it. So as long as you've included this file from somewhere, you can call into todd.csr.publicinterface, whatever that thing is, whatever's in the return block. All right, so this is that same code. All it's doing is returning animal 3. This is the model that we're going to use for everything. Now let's go back and see if anything came into the browser. Close this out. Hey, there it says, all of my prime ministers are their party is animal. Well, that's nice, but wouldn't it be great if we could do something a little bit different with that? Instead of statically overriding it, what would be one thing we could do with the party system that would be a really common way for people to immediately recognize it? Logo's coming. What's before that? Color, right? Hey, we would like to color the party. If it's the Conservative Party, we want one color, and if it's the Labor Party, we want another color, right? So it turns out that I can go in here and I can edit this, edit the page, edit the web part, and I can get that same basic kind of capability by simply changing the JSLink that I'm going to point at. So I'm going to come down here to the, oh, look at that rendering, it's horrible. I'm going to come down into the miscellaneous section, and instead of doing party animal, I'm going to do party color. C-O-L-O-U-R, right? Hey, hey, hey. Woo! I'm going to click OK on party color number 1, and it should come back and give us a nice little rendering. It's squished to begin with, but as soon as we say that we want to go ahead and stop editing the page, then it'll render out fully. Now, what's nice is that each one of these parties is going to come back, hopefully, with a different color, right? What about the ones that aren't really common? Well, I went and said default to black then, right? If it's not one of these two main ones, then we don't know what the Whig Party was way back in the day, right? So we'll just go ahead and use the modern colors, and the rest of them will default to black. Let's take a look at that code real quick. So I'm going to pull up my JSLink files over here. Go to my party color. Unfortunately, because color property was defined by the HTML people, right, it actually forces me to say that the color is a color property, right? But you can see that the render field, let me just show you the file one more time because you'll be like, oh, don't show me that again, right? But I'm in a general bucket called Todd. In the bucket called Todd, I have a CSR bucket. In that bucket, I have a private member, can't call it, right? Another private member, etc. And then down here at the bottom, I publicized one of them. And at the very bottom, I called it. Notice that I don't have the MDS stuff in here. I didn't put that in every single file because I'm trying to keep it simple. What do you have to do? Turn off MDS and you don't have a problem, right? If you're okay with just the first page render, you don't have a problem. So I'm simply going to be calling into the register overrides. Register overrides does that same TO stuff, right, the template object. However, the display form and the view, they're now going to use a different technique. Instead of a static value, I'm calling into a method I defined above, a function, a JavaScript function, and it's going to return back whatever I need to present. That's the idea here. So my render field, if I scroll up, I'll find render field. And the render field basically says, OK, look, go get the current items party column. See how I could use the CTX variable there? So go get the context, the current items party column, and then check to see if it's Democrat or Labor, then make it red. If it's Republican or Conservative, make it blue. Otherwise, leave it as to whatever the font color is for the parent, which is black in most themes, right? And then I'm going to render out a span with the style color equal to whatever color I set up here, and then just the value of the party column, which is going to be Conservative or Labor or whatever. Does that make sense, everybody? Okay, but does anybody see a problem with the way that I'm writing this code? Can you imagine writing a table with a whole bunch of columns, with a whole bunch of child elements, all in concatenated strings? That could get kind of yucky. All right, I got a bunch of LIs, and I got, and it just becomes very difficult to read, concatenating all of these strings. And then guess what? You forgot the closed brace on one of them, and so the whole thing gets wonky, and you're like, oh man, what's happening? So let me show you party color number 2. I highly recommend that you use a standard object-oriented kind of an approach. Notice that in this case, I called it a span, but it's a div. I'm creating an element. Let me do it this way. I'm creating an element that is, in this case, a div. I called it span over here. That's just the variable name, but we could change that. And then I'm literally using HTML syntax to set the color for whichever party it is. And then I'm simply returning the outer HTML of the span itself. Right? So I'm using HTML objects to create that interface. What's nice about that is that they always generate valid HTML. Right? So if I start creating my elements using those built-in HTML objects, I'll have a much more readable, much more supportable, much less likely to be some wonky string problem, right? Because I'm using those objects. So party color number 2 does exactly the same thing, but it uses this technique instead. Make sense? Who said party logo? Let's check that out. See how the color turned out? Oh, look at that. Red and blue all over the place. Okay, that's good. I'm going to go ahead and say, I want to edit this web part. Oh, holy cow, I'm almost out of time. Okay, you got to pick up the pace just a little bit. It's not my fault. Look at this rendering. It's horrible. That's just terrible. I haven't had that slow of a response ever. I don't have a scroll bar. All right, so I'm going to change this to the party logo. What's nice is that I'm not confined to just modifying the party column, right? Remember, this is a view. I said CTX current item dot party, but does that mean that I could get to current item dot full name, current item dot term, etc. Whatever columns are available to me here, right? And that's exactly what I do in this code example. Holy cow! I'm not sure what to do about that because that is not my fault. I'm going to try to jump out of that since that is rendering so poorly, and I'm going to go into Firefox and just see if maybe I can speed it up just a little bit. I don't think it's the Spartan, but it could be, because it's beta. So let me show you the JavaScript file while that's loading up. All right, so down here, party logo, I'll grab number 2 straight away. The difference between 1 and 2 is 1 is a bunch of strings. Number 2 is the create element, right, using standard HTML objects. And so all I'm doing here is I'm simply creating some, under the render field, everything else is the same, right? I'm calling the render overrides. Render override calls the private method. The private method goes ahead and says that my display and view forms are going to be different. And then up here, I've got the render field. So render field defines the party, the work country, because it could be US or UK for the different parties that we've got. I'm creating a span and an image. Here's common parties so that I can say if it's not in a common party list, then just make it default to something, right? And then I'm checking to see if it is in that list. If it's not, then I'm saying the party is something else. So I can get a logo for all of those parties. We don't even know what they looked like from way back in the day, right? Then I'm simply saying, go ahead and use the server-side relative URL to the JavaScript country folder. Where'd I get country from? That's not even the field that I'm on, right? But I'm picking up the country that that item has so I can go find the appropriate logo in that document library. Do you see how this JavaScript is easy to work with, easy to read? This isn't like some highbrow JavaScript thing that you can't grasp onto. It's very similar. Every time you grab one of these files, you go make some alterations about how you would like to present that data. And then you alter it so that it looks pretty. It's just going really slow on this one too. All right, so you're going to have to believe me. Unfortunately, I don't have screenshots of what it looks like, but it really looks slick. Okay? Let me move on. There's another thing I need to mention here. It's in the slide deck, but I can't show it to you here, so it's really hard. It's possible for me to create multiple overrides for a single field in different files. So remember, I have a party color and I have a party logo. Wouldn't it be cool if I could color it and put on the logo? No problem. You just say tilde site collection /js /party color.js pipe tilde site collection /js /party logo.js. And it'll apply the first one, then it'll apply the second one. And so I can get multiple renderings by reusing those customizations that I did. Does that make sense to everybody? Okay. The last thing I'll mention, and again, the forms, I would just recommend going, it's the same logic with forms. The only difference is, since I only have a couple of minutes, let me just talk about forms real quickly. I knew that was an optional demo I wasn't sure I was going to get to, but here's how it works. You can't just override the form presentation and stop, because as soon as the user interacts with that and clicks save, SharePoint can't find the custom interface. They don't know what you did, right? So you have to register a callback. That's it. You literally call register callback and say, hey, SharePoint, when you go to save this, ask me where the value is and tell it which function to call. And so you literally just say, hey, call this function when you're going to save this, and I'll tell you what value the user chose. So you create your own custom interface, and then when they go to save, they call your function to get the value out of it to send back to the database. There's a caveat here, though. What if I'm on the edit form? That means that as I'm coming in and trying to render, I want to check to see if the current field has a value, and if it does, render it so that it's showing the value they previously chose. There's one other thing you can do with editing, and that's validation. And I believe that Martin did quite a few things on validation. And so what you can do is you can basically say, also, when you go to validate this form, you don't know how to validate my custom interface. So call me, and I'll tell you if what they put in there is valid or not. And then you send them back a return that says, yes, it's good, or no, it's not. And then they'll say, hey, this isn't any good. You know, you need to fix this up. Does that make sense to everybody? So those two things are the big differences with what I showed you and how you do the exact same thing on forms. You register a callback, you register a validation function, so that when those two things are happening, not only do they override your presentation, but they also override your editing experience on a field-by-field basis. So the last thing I want to do is there's a final one that I didn't get to show you the code for. Oh, I have connectivity. What is the deal here? I want to show you this last one because it demonstrates what you can do with the whole list item. You don't have to override one field at a time, right? Because I can say, hey, I'm getting a whole bunch of fields. Let me render out this really cool thing. And so what I did, it's super cool to see. So you want to go set this up. But basically what I did is I said, if the rendering in a specific list view uses this JS function, override the whole item. Call my method. I'm going to use whatever properties were included in there to render out something really cool. What I rendered out, you can see here for the presidents, hopefully this goes quickly, was a very different presentation for presidents. That's a same list view that we had for prime ministers, right? Just using the logos and so forth for presidents. That's called leader item 01. If I do leader item 02, I'm hesitant on which one I should go for. Since this one's loaded up, I'm going to go for this one. But the Prime Minister's one works just as well. What if I want to really alter this presentation so that it doesn't look anything like SharePoint, right? I get to alter all of the elements of that. And so if I change this to leader item 02, it will show you a picture of each leader with their name and term superimposed on top of it, right? Because it's just HTML. So I'm just referring to the leader's name in an image tag, and then I'm saying, hey, I want to show some text on top of it, and the text happens to be their full name. So let me just show you that presentation. Oh, we'll finish with that. How about? So I'm going to go ahead and click on the properties of my web part with hopes that it will load quickly. And you'll see that this view will transform to have 2 leaders per row down the page, full picture with their name superimposed on top of it. anything you want to do, right? Because it's the whole list item you have available. You're not just overriding a field by field, you're overriding the whole list item. While that's pulling up, let me just quickly show you what that looks like. Here's leader item number 2. If I scroll down just a little ways, you can see that I'm getting the work country, their full name. I'm creating a couple of HTML values like an image and a couple of spans. Right? I'm saying how many items I want to show per row. That's just a variable so that I can change it up if I want to make it 3 or 4 or whatever I'm trying to do. Then I'm simply creating a server relative URL to that country's first name, .jpg or PNG or whatever it is, right? The president or the prime minister's image. And then I'm appending that image into the span. This is what I'm going to return back, right? And then I'm going ahead and getting their name and setting the CSS so that it'll superimpose over the top. I'm iterating so I know how many rows I've output. And then I'm just returning back that HTML. Super, super easy. I know this maybe looks a little bit complex, but whatever you need to do, you could do it in this using this technique, right? And then down here at the bottom, my override isn't template fields with the party field. It's template item. Override the whole item. Just send me all the fields and I'll make it look pretty. Does that make sense? Isn't this cool? So not only can we override the entire, or sorry, can we stack these up and say, make this rendering happen, then make this rendering happen with a pipe, but we can override the entire list item to change it up to look however we want it to look. Same thing can be done with a form, right? On the list item for the form, I get to take all the fields and output them however I like. The only caveat is I have to tell SharePoint where to call me for each field, register the callback for every single field, so that when they go to save it, I know in that custom interface how to send them back the values that they're going to put into the database. Was this helpful? To see how JSLink is laid out in a very straightforward way with some great reusable templates that you can take back and make supportable solutions that can be reused across at least your site collection and maybe your whole farm. If you want to hear some more from an IW perspective, Wes Preston is doing another talk on this later this afternoon. He's got some great examples, and he talks about it from, hey, if you're an information worker and you need to make this happen, how do you effectively roll this thing out? Okay, so go see Wes's presentation. Otherwise, enjoy the rest of your day. All right?